Can I find my Jason DeRusha sound clip?
If I lived right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
People who recognize I would never want to live near an interstate, never in a million years. The noise, the fast moving traffic, the pollution, I wouldn't do it to myself and my family. But it has to exist. And if it has to exist, well, it is where it is. Why would we get rid of it? It has to exist. What do we tell those people about how we're all going to get around in the wake of removing I-94?
We're rolling. We're rolling.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
We are back on the Wedge Live podcast. We're talking about I-94 again, the ongoing debate about replacing Interstate 94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul with an at-grade boulevard option. Removing the interstate would provide opportunities for transit, biking, walking connections, would enable the reclamation of all that public land for development opportunities, in addition to removing an enormous public health disaster from our urban core. And I'm excited about today's guest. Mateo Frumholtz is a graduate student, PhD student at the University of Minnesota, studying public health. Can you give us your credentials?
I'm an epidemiologist by training. I did my master's in public health, especially in environmental health at the U. And then I worked as an epidemiologist for 7 years. And then I'm in year 3 of grad school. So I know enough to be dangerous and enough to know that I don't know much of anything.
I remember reading a thing you wrote in the Star Tribune mentioning that you are a nearby resident, adjacent to 94. So you have lived experience.
Yeah, I do not live within I think a lot of the pollution and transportation experts say like within 500 and 600 feet where you get like the most environmental exposure to transportation related pollution. I do not live within 500, 600 feet of the highway, but I live like just outside that cutoff. And I bike across I-94 every day to get to the Green Line. So I unfortunately have to interact with that highway a lot.
A lot of people make the climate and environmental argument for getting rid of 94 and like working on our transportation system, fixing the street in front of your house, like improving transit, letting people bike places as a climate concern. And I always think like no one is going to sacrifice their way of life to save the planet. We are just that selfish. Like what the argument I make, and this is my selfish argument because it's how I live my life and why I think these things are so important, is like human misery. The amount of human misery and death that is caused by the way we build our transportation system. And so you're in public health, and so I'm excited to talk about it from that perspective because one, the pollution kills a lot of people. Fast-moving, dangerously designed streets kills a lot of people. Are we making the case in the correct way, do you think? Because I find it very compelling, the human misery element. Like we could fix a lot of human misery by changing this up. Forget about sacrificing how you live your life. Just make our lives better.
Yeah. No, I love that framing, John. And that's kind of exactly how I originally came to the I-94 conversation. There are a million reasons why we need to get rid of that highway. I'm biased. Obviously, I work in public health and I think about public health a lot. But like that to me is like the most obvious answer for getting rid of the highway. Not like pollution is a huge major one, right? Like we know that it's associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, cancer, like anything, right? And I feel like, especially in like health policy, like so many conversations around health policy are just like the sheer amount of money that we're spending on healthcare. And I mean, for me, like, I don't really care if we spend that much money on healthcare. Like, I want people to be healthy and to have access to health services. But if you really wanted to cut down on cost of healthcare services, the best way to do it would be through prevention, right? And in my mind, when you're talking about one of the largest highways that bifurcate two of your largest cities, two of the most significant cities in the Midwest, um, it's a no-brainer that getting rid of I-94 would help alleviate a lot of public health concerns from asthma, cardiovascular disease. I mean, air pollution is also linked to dementia, like long-term health outcomes, right? Um, so yeah, I love the argument and the framing that transportation is a huge public health concern.
So there's construction on 94 over the summer and closures. What were the impacts of that? Should we take away from what happened there?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, especially at the beginning of the summer when 94 like first shut down, we were like scrambling, right, to find like alternate roadways. I saw like a ton of people switch to Lake Street, Marshall Avenue, the river roads along University. So we saw this huge like dispersion of traffic to local roads. And a lot of people, both on social media and also in the Search Review and Minpost and other kind of local outlets, like rightly we're talking about like the impact that this has on folks that typically never experience this like volume of traffic. And I feel like what a lot of like MnDOT analysts and other kind of folks who want to either keep the highway as is or even expand it say is that this is the intended impact of closing the highway, right? That we're actually just going to expose like so many more people to air pollution. And I think like the argument that I and so many other like urbanists, urban transit nerds, both locally and around the country and the world, is that this is actually not the inevitability of highway removal, right? The argument that I'm trying to make in a piece that hopefully is coming out soon is that like what happened this summer is actually a planning failure, not the inevitability of highway removal. Like there's so many things that MnDOT, the Metropolitan Council, Metro Transit could have like collaborated with and worked together on to actually make this summer not only easier for folks in cars, easier for folks on like the local roads where traffic ended up, but also to help kind of shift a lot of transit modes. Right, we heard like anecdotally a lot of folks saying, "Hey, I'm actually going to bike to work instead of taking the car because it actually takes twice as long to drive now than it would to bike." Um, that requires comfort in our current bike infrastructure, which is growing, which is awesome. But not everybody is there yet. It requires knowledge of how to get from point A to point B via other modes, but it also requires really good, reliable, fast transit. And when you have transit on local roads now competing with an increased volume of car on local roads, that toss up is much harder for folks who don't usually rely on transit. So for so many reasons, this summer was just a planning failure. It did not have to be this miserable. And I think that's what so much of the at-grade conversation in the Boulevard is all about. It's centering the fact that a better future is absolutely possible for this corridor.
Maybe you don't know the answer to this. Was any attempt made to quantify, like, how much traffic? Was it the same amount of traffic that was coming through the corridor as before? Was it reduced? What was the pollution impact around I-94 when it got shut down compared to the baseline? Do you know that?
So that's a great question. So right towards the end of the spring, right before kind of the summer construction kicked off, but we knew that it was coming. The Center for Transportation Studies at the University of Minnesota, which is an awesome resource, everybody should go check out their website, has hosted like a gathering, and a lot of MnDOT folks were there. And that was actually a question that came up a lot in that meeting. It's like you actually have an incredible opportunity to study like what happens, right? Like all your modeling assumptions are somewhat flawed, but you now have what we call like a natural experiment to see how many people like shifted their modes, how many people actually went on these local roads, how many people canceled their trips altogether, right? As far as I know, nothing has come out kind of summarizing any results of that. But back then, and in conversations I've had with others, it does seem like MnDOT and folks at the University of Minnesota are interested in looking at some data and trying to understand what was the result of this summer's kind of closure impacts. So hopefully it's in the work, but as far as I know, nothing's come out yet.
Well, I hope the data was at least collected because that was an opportunity. I could see why maybe they wouldn't want to know the answer to those questions because part of the reason we're talking is because MnDOT has decided we're not even going to study the at-grade boulevard option. Like, not only have we decided we're never going to do it, we've decided we won't look at it. We don't want to know. And if you wrote a thing, was it earlier this year that you wrote in the Star Tribune about
Yeah. So that
wild conclusions that they made?
Yeah, if you want a much longer version of that, there is on DSA's website. They were the ones that ended up posting the report I wrote. It's called Just Vibes, Evaluating MnDOT's Rethinking I-94 Alternative Score. And there I do like a much longer like expose and critique of their entire like the leaked Excel sheets and PDFs of how they scored these alternatives, because it's absolutely wild. I feel like I just showed a few little hints at some of the pretty kind of duplicitous scoring of those alternatives.
I want to read off some of the things you wrote. MnDOT's assessment is full of puzzling contradictions. It finds that highway expansion would increase pedestrian access, while the boulevard expanded sidewalks would decrease it. It asserts that an expanded freeway would benefit bikers, but a boulevard with a designated bike lane would be worse. It suggests that a smaller road with more space for greenery would increase exposure to air pollution, whereas an expanded freeway that directly cuts through neighborhoods wouldn't. These bizarre findings are based on the core assumption underpinning all of the MnDOT analyses, that the total amount of car traffic cannot be reduced.
Their overall project goals are also like extremely conservative. I think I say this in this piece, but it's also like a table in the report that when you look at like in MnDOT land, right, the most incredible option of expanding car traffic would increase like daily throughput of people by like over 30,000. I think they estimate like 31,000, right? So if we expand our highways, we can get 31,000 more people through this corridor every day. But then their most progressive and wild dream of expanding transit increases throughput of 570 people per day. And you're like, okay, I think this shows exactly how serious we are about shifting transportation modes to public transit, to walkability, to bikeability. And like, I don't know, like, is that really the goals that we all living in the Twin Cities have? Or is that the goal of folks living in the suburbs that have to cross the Twin Cities every day to get their jobs, to commute, whatever, have instilled for us who live in the cities?
Well, what do those people do? How are they going to get to their jobs? You can't force them to ride the bus. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
But like seriously, like, how do you respond to people like, can I find my Jason DeRusha sound clip?
If I lived right by a highway, I would want the highway to be gone too.
People who recognize I would never want to live near an interstate, never in a million years. The noise, the fast moving traffic, the pollution, I wouldn't do it to myself and my family. But it has to exist. And if it has to exist, well, it is where it is. Why would we get rid of it? It has to exist. What do we tell those people about how we're all going to get around in the wake of removing I-94?
I'd say a few things, right? I think one, to put us into some context, the vast majority of car trips in the United States are actually incredibly short, right? I think, so the Federal Highway Administration does like a national like transportation survey. I think it's the National Household Travel Survey. And back in 2022, they found that like 52% of households drive less than 6 miles, and almost 40% of like car trips, sorry, not households, 52% of car trips are less than 6 miles, and almost 40% of car trips are 3 or less miles, right? So I think that is helpful to put things into context, right? And even the study by Tool Design that our streets put out over a year ago, right, confirms this idea that the vast majority of trips are very short distances. So those trips could actually be replaced by public transit, or by walking, biking, rolling, whatever, right? And to also give us some sort of like theoretical backing to this conversation, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Swiss cheese model. Okay, so this is super niche because I worked at the health department during COVID, and I feel like there was lots of conversations about like mitigation strategies, prevention strategies for the risk of getting exposed and infecting others to COVID. And at a population level, what we think about is this Swiss cheese model. And you can think of like a slice of Swiss cheese having random holes, and the next slice has another set of random holes. So the first slice might be like a mask, right? A mask is going to prevent a ton of like exposure, infectious disease exposure dynamics, but not everything, right? So the next layer of Swiss cheese is like social distancing, right? So then through each like mitigation strategy that you use, you end up with like very, very low overall risk of transmitting COVID. And I actually think that a similar like dynamic is happening in transportation. So we think of like the first layer of Swiss cheese as being like mode shifting. We can actually get a lot of the car trips that are happening every single day, replace those with better access to public transportation, better access to biking, and walking, rolling, everything. The next layer is like changing our land use, right? A lot of folks right now rely on cars because of like highly segregated zoning practices. Suburbs are built to be these like enclaves, predominantly white enclaves in the middle of nowhere. So they need highways to get to like job centers or other like zoning areas where their jobs are. But if we change our land use policies, we actually can bring those jobs a lot closer to where people are, right? So that's like another layer of the Swiss cheese. So by the end, the goal is not to replace like 100% of car trips with it, but it's to put in practices and policies that allow folks to have way more accessibility to the things that they want to get to. And at the heart of it, I think that is also what replacing the I-94 highway with an at-grade boulevard is, right? We mentioned like a lot of transportation options that could have happened this summer. But the other thing that was woefully missing, not that it could be addressed in a summer, but it could be the fundamental problem can absolutely be addressed by replacing the I-94 highway, is this land use policy, right? Like I live in St. Paul. They just shut down yet another grocery store in the Cub in Midway. So that means that I used to go to that grocery store. I now have to find a new grocery store. I might have to drive longer and farther, right? Which that might mean that I now have to hop on the highway, for example, right? Or folks who lived in Midway or somewhere else now have to hop on the highway to get to a different grocery store. But if that highway wasn't there, a grocery store might pop up where that highway is now, which means that I would actually be able to access a grocery store, way better. So that's a lot of the dynamics within the cities, right? And then the question of like, what happens to the folks that are outside that now take the I-94 to get to their jobs? Well, for starters, we do have a fairly good like highway ring around the Twin Cities. First of all, I'm not like a transportation planning engineer, so I think that this question could be much well answered by some of those folks. But we can definitely like accommodate and access. We could definitely accommodate getting those folks to their commute through using like the outer suburb rings, or through land use policies, right? Bringing their jobs closer to where they are.
What if I live in Wisconsin and I want to commute to Edina as like a police officer? What if I want to do that? What if that is the most important thing to me, is being able to commute to my job from Wisconsin through St. Paul and Minneapolis to Edina? How do we help those people?
Sure. I mean, if you were to take 94, the 94 would end right around St. Paul. So you go up north. What is it? 694 that goes north?
I don't know. I don't drive, Mateo.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, 494 goes south. I think 694 goes north. You could take 494 to essentially go around the cities, right? And that's actually how most cities around the world are
okay,
designed.
so you're telling me there are all alternate routes, okay? We can Google Maps our way through this for people driving from Wisconsin to the western suburbs.
Or if we invested in rail, which is another aspect of I-94.
Well, that's never happening. That's not happening, Mateo.
Have you paid
attention to anything that has happened? I'm not even sure we're going to build the Blue Line extension.
That makes me sad.
Okay. Well, we should promote before we get too much further. The Better Than 94 Rally to Restore. It's called November 6th at 5:30 to 7:30. I'm going to be at a bike ride beginning at I believe 4:30 at the Sabo Bridge. I'm going to that bike ride on the way to this rally, and you can find all the details for this event and the bike ride to it at ourstreetsmn.org/94action. I will see you on that bike ride and then at the rally.
Is this going to be an official emergency bike ride tag along?
I mean, it is an emergency.
It is an
and
emergency.
it is a bike ride, so it does qualify as an emergency bike ride. This is a public health emergency, I think. Speaking of emergencies, I don't know if I should bring this up, but like so many people die on our streets. Why can we not? Is it because it's so common and it's just we accept these things as a way of life? People will die. Tens of thousands of people will die on our streets. Many, many thousands of people will get cancer or diseases or suffer some horrible public health consequence from pollution near interstates. And it just doesn't break through as a crisis that needs to be addressed. It's just kind of a thing that we're just going to keep doing.
Yeah, we've completely naturalized the morbidity and mortality that comes with like car dependence and car culture. I feel like especially on today on Halloween, I will say it is very like incredible that we're talking about such an ominous topic, highways and pollution, on the spookiest of days. And I feel like on the social media rounds has appeared this as it always does every October 31st, the chart of like number of kids that are killed by cars, and you just see this massive like increase on Halloween, and it's because there's so many more kids walking around. I'm a data analyst, so that chart isn't perfect, and there's a lot of things that we should or should not interpret with that chart. But I think the main message is that on a day where the main message of that chart is just that kids are killed by cars, are hit by cars every single day, and it's absolutely like crazy to think that we're okay with that status quo, and that we don't want to do anything to change the policy. And another message of that is like, hey, drivers, be careful of kids. And I love that. I love PSAs. But I think perhaps a much like better argument is maybe we should change our roads. Maybe the problem isn't necessarily that it's dark outside and kids are wandering, or that more kids are outside walking, but that our roads are fundamentally flawed, and that it's not that the kids aren't seeing. It's just that over time we have like eroded public infrastructure that is safe for kids to be in, right? Whether it be schools or streets, and yeah, and I think these, Halloween is a great reminder that it's a great like urban planning holiday, like urban design holiday, because it incentivizes and encourages kids to walk around their neighborhood, but it also reminds us of like how fundamentally unsafe it is to do that, unfortunately, in a lot of urban spaces.
And people all the time at public meetings, you either have people on the side of, well, I sure would like my kids to be able to go outside and travel safely, or like bike with them to school. I would like to do those things safely. And then the other side is, well, the only people advocating for this are single, childless young men who have the athletic prowess to bike around. Wait till you have a family. Then you'll need to be driving all over the place. I tend to agree with the first group of people who would like their children and families to be safe leaving their home outside of a vehicle.
I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine how liberating it must be for parents to be able to like have their kids like go to their social activities in friend's house like via safe public transportation or walking or biking, as opposed to like having to give them rides to and from like every single day. Yeah, I think that would be so liberating.
have we reached the point of the segment where you blow our minds with some maps?
Yes.
If you're listening, you may want to fire up YouTube because we're going to look at some amazing visualizations here. YouTube.com/Wedge Live.
Okay. I feel like this map made the rounds, very much promoted by you, which is awesome. On Blue Sky, and I feel like I wanted to talk more about this. So I'll give some context as to what this data, where it comes from, how it's collected, what it means, and what sort of really cool things we can learn about it. So the data that you're looking at looks at the pollution attributable risk of cancer, risk of excess cancer attributed to pollution in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So these numbers here are the pollution attributable cancer risk per 100,000 people. So the way to interpret this is, this is like 1.94 to 2.11. So let's say that there were 100,000 people living in this block group. Hypothetically, there aren't. That we would expect around 1.9 to 2.1 cases of cancer over a lifetime of exposure to the pollution in this block group attributed to that pollution. Now, there are not 100,000 people here. That's just how we usually talk about risk in public health. But what it does help us understand is these trends in exposures to air pollutions. Now, another important caveat is like why we break down certain colors. The way that we have it done now is based on the geographic scale that we're looking at. So in a second, when I show you the next map, you're going to see, like, for example, like the colors in these areas are going to change a little bit. And that's because we're showing you a much larger area that includes a lot of other block groups with new data. But essentially what I want you to think about is like areas in these darkest colors represent the top 2.5 percentile of the distribution of the risk. So essentially, when you're looking at the block groups in these areas, the darkest colors truly are like the most exposure to air pollution.
Right. Can I ask you a question about the black lines? Are those pipes carrying dangerous toxic sludge through the Twin Cities? What are these black lines on the map?
Essentially, yes, they're highways, which you could
those are
absolutely
highways.
categorize as carrying dangerous toxic sludge through the Twin Cities. And also say that this is based on like measured and known pollution. Like a lot of recent literature has also highlighted how like there are other emissions and pollutions associated with vehicles that we're just now starting to understand. And this data is from 2017 and likely does not include a lot of those metrics, right? One that comes to mind right now is like brake dust, right? We're now seeing that is a huge emitter of like microplastics and other sources of pollution, and also say this is like toxic air pollution mainly. But anyway, so we can see a lot of things going on, right? Predominantly when you hug closer to the highways, and this is definitely kind of what you were highlighting. We see darker colors. I do want to highlight this one right here.
What is that one close to?
Yeah, so that one is really, really important to highlight because that is where a foundry, St. Paul Brass Foundry, is actually located. And it's definitely, according to MNRIS data, it's definitely like a huge site of pollution. You can usually see, like, if you look at Minneapolis and cities, you really don't see like that much darker color when you move further away from highways, unless they're like industrial areas. And this is very much an industrial corridor north of Frogtown and Rondo. So there's a huge rail line that goes through here. But particularly in this block group, it is St. Paul Brass and Foundry that is driving this increased pollution attributable cancer risk.
So we had a debate over the garbage burner in Minneapolis.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Like it felt like that was gaining so much support to shut it down just based on the idea that it is emitting pollution into the air and harming people. And I'm thinking, no, this map is way more compelling about interstates. Let's continue to have conversations about the interstate because so many more people are affected, and the correlation is just so much clearer than it was in that one.
I do have a cool map about Herc if you want to see it.
Oh, sure.
The format's not as great, but
How do we know this? This is fascinating.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So this is so essentially the way that MinRisk works. It's an incredible data set and tool that the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency works on and releases every 3 years. Some great analysts over at MPCA are working on this data. And the way that MinRisk kind of works is that they look at like point source pollution data. So that means like permitted facilities that are releasing toxic air pollution, like the HERC, like Northern Iron, like St. Paul Brass. They look at mobile sources like transportation. They look at like agricultural pollution. They look at like wood burning, right? So there's all these avenues and sources of toxic air pollution. And they try to kind of model and estimate and count all of that known air pollution. And then they aggregate it at the block group level, which is a census kind of geographic unit. And then they kind of use a lot of literature in collaboration with the EPA to kind of model the risk of either cancer or other broadly like health concerns. So this one, and the beauty of kind of this system and this data set is that they actually have data, this modeled data for every single permitted facility in the state. So they essentially take all of the known emissions of the HERC, for example, and they look at what do we think is happening at a broader scale, not just the neighborhood directly right next to the HERC. How much pollution do we think is happening, and what is the risk of cancer associated with that pollution? So the first thing I'll highlight is that, like, compared to like these numbers above, right? Like 0.83 is like the smallest for all pollution sources. When it comes to the HERC, is that it's actually like really, really, really small. It's smaller scale, but that does not mean it's negligible, right? And I think a lot of folks saw the screenshots from the city of Minneapolis' presentation that focus on Minneapolis. But when I got this data, I really kind of wanted to highlight the fact that it's not just Minneapolis that's actually being exposed to this, right? You can see St. Paul has some of the highest.
Deep red in St. Paul.
Exactly. But all the way out to, what is this? Not Dakota, Washington County, right? And even Dakota County. So yeah, it's incredible the scale of pollution that a lot of these facilities kind of emit. And the HERC is just one example.
What is the scale difference between the problems? Is there a way to compare like the HERC compared to living next to an interstate? Like how do we judge the scale of the problem caused by the HERC versus other sources of pollution?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's actually something I'm trying to work on with this data set. So we can imagine, for example, let me zoom in a little bit. We can imagine, for example, let's just highlight St. Paul Brass right now because it's the one I'm trying to understand. So we can imagine the colors that we're seeing now use kind of all pollution kind of metrics, right? So we take transportation, all the permitted facilities. So in this block group, we can imagine that there is pollution coming from the highways, from roads. There's pollution coming from St. Paul Brass. There's pollution coming from Northern Iron. There's pollution coming from the HERC, et cetera, right? So I think the goal that and what I think your question is alluding to is like, how do we decompose this kind of individual risk that's happening in this block group and understand what is driving the risk in that block group? I can say for this block group, what's driving it is St. Paul Brass, right? It's far enough from the highway that is not, the single largest, driver, although it is still really significant. Whereas when you look down here right next to the highway, if there's no industrial facility nearby, it might actually be largely driving the highway. So on like a population level, I think there's no doubt, and MPCA kind of shows these graphs really nicely, that what's driving our greenhouse gas emissions and PM2.5 pollution, toxic air pollution is transportation, right? Which is why we think of I-94, so much in this landscape.
Why is that stretch in South Minneapolis so deep red, and then a little bit north of it, it's less deep red? Like, what is going on in that area?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. Do you know of any like industrial facility that might be here? I know East Phillips has quite a few, and this is 2017 data. So at this point, Bituminous and Smith are still operational. Um, but yeah, I don't know. The last little map I have for you is actually bringing us up out a little bit closer. So as you can see, some of these areas change colors. So for example, when we were focusing only in Minneapolis and St. Paul, a lot of the areas around the lakes here were kind of the lightest colors. And it's because it's important to put things into context, right? When we're looking at a macro level of, let's say, these two counties, I'm now kind of looking at the risks of a much larger area. So all of these colors, all these breakdowns are tied to the underlying distribution of the data, as opposed to specific cut points and benchmarks, right? So now we see that the top 2.5 percentile of the risks, for the most part, they actually haven't changed that much, right? But we can now see some other areas that might be areas of concern, even when we put into context the fact that there's just way more pollution in the Twin Cities than
What's going on to the northeast?
Yeah, this is like an industrial kind of zoning area, so lots of like industrial facilities here.
And then to the southwest?
Okay, I don't know exactly, but I think so. Another thing that the data has shown is like this company Japs Olson. They're like a printing service, I think. I think they're located around here. Yeah, they're like St. Louis Park, Excelsior Boulevard. So I think that is what's going on here. Yeah, so I think this data is really, really cool. I'm trying to advertise that a lot of folks can use this data to look at really interesting air pollution dynamics, and especially with all the amazing like EJ fights going on in the Twin Cities, like this is a data source that we should all be getting better exposure to and using to really advance and advocate these ongoing fights, including I-94.
One of the arguments MnDOT makes that you referenced in your first thing for the Star Tribune a while ago was that they assume car traffic will remain the same, and so that's how they arrive at the idea that removing the interstate will actually make all of this pollution worse. Mateo, all of these maps are going to get worse if you remove the source of pollution, because every other street in every other neighborhood will become an interstate. Cars will be just stop traffic. It'll be like an apocalypse movie where the roads are clogged and people just run out of gas and start eating each other. It's just going to be a disaster. What do you say to that?
Yeah, their modeling and their assumptions are fascinating, and I feel like someone could write an entire essay about the philosophy and the rationale that goes behind justifying those assumptions. But I think like two things come to mind. One is a lot of their first of all, they have not done a thorough like pollution analysis for these alternatives, right? That actually comes at the next phase. The alternatives that they pass now move to like a tier one EIS, environmental impact assessment, evaluation, and that's where they actually do way more fine-grained modeling when it comes to air pollution. The way that they kind of justify not moving the at-grade options is using like a qualitative assessment, their terms, which is essentially like yes or no, like, does this policy have the potential to like increase pollution concerns? And the way that they're talking about that, the way that they're thinking about that, and we see that in a lot of their documents and in their written kind of testimonials, but also in conversations with MnDOT analysts at like the coffee in the community events, which have been popping up all summer, is, you know, twofold. One is like, well, we're assuming that cars along an at-grade boulevard would be going like 20 to 25 miles per hour, which in and of itself is a wild assumption, right?
Right.
Like no one has ever said that that is the expected speed limit.
Can't
Like,
even get
and
people to go 25 miles an hour on my skinny residential street. How are you going to do it on a big old
like
boulevard?
you're saying that a 7-mile boulevard is going to be entirely a school zone. Like like, don't get me wrong, like we definitely have to have a conversation about speed limits, right? But like that's a wild assumption. And their like modeling assessment is like, well, when you have 20-mile-per-hour road, cars are idling, oh, you like drastically increase like the rate of pollution per vehicle. So that's like point A. Point B is, well, at an at-grade boulevard, way more people would be out and about and walking. So there's actually way more direct exposure to pollution, period. And point C is, let's ignore the fact that when we are scoring these alternatives, the daily throughput, right, the at-grade would be super, like much more reduced. So we're going to penalize it on throughput. But when it comes to pollution, we're not going to take into account that, yes, they're driving lower speeds, but there's actually a huge reduction in the volume of cars passing, right? So we're only going to really care about the rate of pollution emissions and not the volume of cars emitting that pollution when it comes to scoring the at-grade options on like pollution metrics, right? So it's an incredible contortion and exercise of advanced gymnastics to get at the conclusion that the at-grade option is worse for pollution. Not that, like, first of all, we haven't even, like, no one's finalized like a street design of what the at-grade option would look like. So I just feel like it was a really disingenuous way to score these alternatives, and just conforms what they wanted to advance anyway, right? Which is maintenance or like a minor reconfiguration of the highway.
All we're asking MnDOT, that's what this rally is, and this petition is about, asking you to study the option, so we can see how it stacks up for real instead of these ridiculous analyses that don't make any sense at all.
And there's a community support letter as well that is floating around, betterthan94.org, I think. And folks should definitely sign on to that letter if they're interested. And yeah, show up at the rally November 6th.
Okay, well, Mateo Frumholtz, thank you for joining me. Thank you for showing us your beautiful maps of deadly pollution.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, John.
This has been the Wedge Live Podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Thank you for listening.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.